Chapter 90. This venerable one's idiom explanation is just fine. By the time Chu Wanning finally woke up, it was noon. The tapir fragrance stew was certainly quite effective. He had managed to get a full night's rest, undisturbed by dreams. He sat up leisurely and yawned. Moran? That disciple of his loved sleep far more than he, so it was a surprise not to find him still curled up on the floor. Chu Wanning blinked, then called for him again. No reply. He stood and smoothed his robes, brushing through the wispy strands of his long hair and pulling it up as he padded toward the screen dividing the room. The divider bore an elegantly painted image of wild birds soaring through a cloud bank woven between mountain peaks. Steam rose from behind it. Someone was bathing on the other side. He hesitated before the screen and tried again. Moran. Still, there was no reply. Growing suspicious, Chu Wanning knocked on the wooden frame of the divider. After several more attempts with no response, he finally furrowed his brow and walked around the screen. This part of the room was intended for bathing and washing, and a large bath barrel of camphor wood stood right in the middle. Chu Wanning glanced at it hastily. It was filled with hot, steamy water, and bathing herbs, set out earlier by the inn, floated on its surface. But right now, there was no one to be seen. He looked around again and spied Moran's clothes folded neatly over the wooden frame. He couldn't possibly have bathed and then run out naked, could he? Chu Wanning's temples throbbed as he shoved the terrifying thought aside, his lips pressed tightly together and face slightly ashen. He turned and was about to leave when he heard gurgling from behind him. Chu Wanning looked back to see bubbles rising to the water's surface from beneath the herbs and petals floating in the barrel. Was someone inside? No sooner had the thought crossed his mind than a naked young man sprang from the barrel with a splash, like a dragon soaring out of the water. Chu Wanning was so startled he inadvertently stumbled back 2 steps. It seemed Moran had been holding his breath underwater, and so didn't hear Chu Wanning calling for him outside. When he could hold it no longer, he stood, fully exposing the upper half of his body. He shook the water from his hair like a dog drying itself, splashing all of it right onto Chu Wanning's robes. Moran! Ah! Moran froze mid-shake, eyes wide and round. He clearly hadn't expected Chu Wanning to be there and gasped. Shizun! You... Chu Wanning's eyes swept across the young man's well-proportioned figure. Moran's shoulders had already become quite broad, the lines of his body firm and defined, supple and youthfully taut. Droplets of water traced the contours of his toned chest, gathering in thin rivulets that trickled down, dazzling under the sunlight. He looked like a beautiful merman, half out of the water, eyes glistening, a few stray petals caught in the wet hair that clung to his body. Moran wiped the water from his face and leaned toward Chu Wanning with a grin, his shoulder blades flexing like a leopard's, as he folded his arms over the edge of the bath and tilted his head to beam brightly up at him. Chu Wanning found himself a little dizzy, his face a little warm, and he asked without thinking, "What are you doing?" "Taking a bath." "In the morning?" Heh. Moran chuckled guiltily. He was actually rinsing with cold water in an attempt to put out the fire in his loins. It had worked well enough, but then, since he had already stripped, he felt he might as well take a bath while he was at it. The soak had put him in a good mood, so he had dived down to practice holding his breath. He certainly hadn't anticipated that Chu Wanning would wander in like this. "What's with that goofy smile?" Chu Wanning knitted his brows, trying to cover up the heat steaming his brain with a cool tone of voice. "Why didn't you wake me if you were up early? Messing around like this, throwing your clothes all over the place. Where are you, man? Shizun, you've got some water on your face." There was a splash as Moran lifted his hand to wipe Chu Wanning's cheek. "Nurse, Moran laughed. He had forgotten that his hand was wet too, and would only make Chu Wanning's cheek even wetter. Chu Wanning stood frozen, the air around him cooling by several degrees. His expression was strained, his lips pressed together. Only his eyelashes quivered now and then. He felt like he was trying to train a hunting dog, only to get nuzzled by the crafty pup instead. "Get out and get dressed. We have to head back to the sect." In the end, Chu Wanning tossed out these words with a frosty expression and left with a swish of his sleeves. But where Moran couldn't see, the tips of Chu Wanning's ears were red, just like how, where Chu Wanning couldn't see, that pair of dewy eyes, still tinged with yearning and swimming with complicated feelings, stared helplessly after him until he disappeared around the corner. The endearing smile slid off Moran's face, replaced by a look of frustration. He smacked the water in annoyance, then scooped up a handful and scrubbed mercilessly at his face. What the actual hell? What was wrong with him today? All he did was look at Chu Wanning a little while bathing and touch his cheek briefly. He had just managed to suppress his arousal, and now he was hard again. "Weren't you getting dressed? What took you so long?" Chu Wanning chided. He turned from his place by the window in obvious exasperation. His robes fluttered gently in the breeze, and fine strands of hair caressed his jade-like cheeks. Moran coughed. "I was drying my hair with a spell." He mumbled vaguely. "But I'm not very good at it, so it took a while. Sorry to keep shizun waiting." Such uncharacteristic propriety caught Chu Wanning a bit off guard. He shot his disciple another glance before saying, "If you're done washing, go get packed. We can go rent a boat. I don't feel like riding swords, and I'm tired of horses too. Let's go by water and enjoy some sightseeing on the way." "Okay, sounds good." Moran didn't dare look at him for too long, coughing a few more times to cover his unease. Chu Wanning frowned. "What's wrong with your throat?" "Nothing." Moran turned hastily to go pack. They stopped at a store to pick up some snacks and dry goods for the trip, then made their way to the docks to rent a vessel. The pair sailed down the Yangtze River. Whenever they came to an area impassable by water, they unfurled the wooden wings of the boat and soared through the air on a magical draft instead. This method of traveling wasn't swift, but it was peaceful and relaxing. 8 days later, they arrived at Sisheng Peak. The wooden boat slid down the current to dock by the mountain gate. Moran lifted the bamboo curtain, allowing Chu Wanning to step out from the cabin first before following himself. The hour was late, and the moon hung bright overhead. The Yuheng elder had written to Chu Chengyong with explicit instructions not to send a reception, so they encountered no one until they'd already climbed the stairs to the main gate. There, 4 disciples guarded the entrance. "Yuheng elder! More Gongse!" For some reason, panic flashed across the disciples' faces at the sight of them. Before either could react, all 4 dropped to their knees and looked up at the pair. "Elder, Gongse!" They entreated urgently. "There are people inside who've come to seek retribution against you. The sect leader sent a messenger bird to tell you to stay away, but it looks like that fat bird was too slow. Please go hide in Wuchang town for a while. Whatever you do, don't go inside right now." Chu Wanning narrowed his eyes. "What is the matter? Why are you all so panicked?" "It's people from the upper cultivation realm. They're accusing the elder of demonic cultivation, and they want to haul you off to Tianyan Pavilion for an inquiry." "Tianyan Pavilion?" Moran repeated, alarmed. "Isn't that the prison set up by all the 10 great sects, reserved for the most heinous of criminals?" "That's the one. They're here about the incident at Butterfly Town." One of the 4, a young woman, said anxiously, "Does the elder remember? That time you were caned as punishment." "At most, that was misuse of cultivation techniques, or involving ordinary people. Besides, Shizun has already accepted punishment for it. Why have they suddenly dragged out that old affair again? And even gone so far as to involve Tianyan Pavilion? Moran frowned. And what's this about demonic cultivation? We don't know the details either, but we heard everyone in Butterfly Town died overnight, killed by some half-ghost, half-deity entity that appeared to be acting at someone's behest. The ghost deity is incredibly powerful, and the average wandering cultivator definitely wouldn't be able to order her about, so those people from the upper cultivation realm suspect that Yuheng Elder did it. Chu Wanning had no words. Moran laughed. And here I was getting all worried. This is a simple misunderstanding, easy enough to explain. There's no need to hide. He turned to grin at Chu Wanning. Shizun, can you believe these people? Expel some small fiend, and they'll say you're taking opportunities from the youngsters. Purge a major demon, and they'll accuse you of practicing demonic cultivation and keeping a ghost deity to do your bidding. At this rate, we'd best stop doing anything at all and sit home meditating all day like they do. But Chu Wanning wasn't smiling. His expression was terrible, and he stood quietly for a time before asking, Every single person at Butterfly Town is dead? That's what I heard. Not one survivor. Chu Wanning closed his eyes, silent. The female disciple noticed his strange expression. Elder? She asked uneasily. This incident was not my doing, but it may have occurred because I was not sufficiently thorough with the exorcism. If I am indeed to blame, then I will not shirk responsibility. Chu Wanning opened his eyes slowly. Moran, let's go in. The walls of Loyalty Hall were lined with 12 lamps of coiling bronze. Each lamp was 10 feet tall, with 9 layers of branches extending from the central stand, short toward the top and longer toward the bottom. The 356 candle lanterns on these branches lit the main hall of Sisheng Peak so brightly that the night was practically indistinguishable from day. Chua Chengyong, dressed in full martial attire, stood straight-backed on the high dais of the hall. He looked like a cast-iron statue as he stared down at the people below with eyes of a predator. Li Chuangchu, I'll say it one last time. The Yuheng Elder is not at the sect right now. Moreover, I can vouch with my very life that what happened at Butterfly Town was no doing of his. So quit throwing around all these baseless whatchamacallit. Next to him, Madame Wang whispered discreetly from behind her sleeve. Accusations. Ahem. Quit throwing around all these baseless whatchamacallit accusations. Chu Qingyang declared with an imposing sweep of his hand. Madame Wang was at a loss for words. Not counting Sisheng Peak's own guard disciples, some 30 people waited in the hall. The group was dressed in jade-green robes, carried horsetail whisks in their arms, and wore square, black gauze Jinjian hats. Obviously disciples from the recently established and rapidly rising Bitan manor of the upper cultivation realm. The man at their head was in his 50s, with a pair of long whiskers that stuck out from the sides of his face and drifted in a slight draft like those of a catfish. This was none other than the Bitan manor leader himself, Li Wuxin. Zhu Zhangmen! Li Wuxin sneered as he twirled a whisker. I'm only here to reason with you, because your sect is yet considered a righteous one. The tragedy at Butterfly Town occurred after your Yuheng Elder and his disciples performed an exorcism there. Other than these 3, the Chen household had no contact whatsoever with any cultivators. We have evidence and witnesses both. You have no choice but to admit fault in this matter. Chu Meng, standing next to his father, couldn't take it anymore. And what fucking right do you lot have to speak? When have you ever taken it upon yourself to deal with the problems of the lower cultivation realm? All you ever do is sit on your hands, trying to cultivate yourselves to immortality. Then, the moment something happens, you rush down here and try to lay blame on my shizun. What kind of justice is that? Sure, Gongzi. Rather than get mad, Li Wuxin leveled a meaningful look at him and smiled. I've heard of you. People call you the son of the phoenix. But meeting you in person today and seeing for myself, poise and composure has certainly been, shall we say, an eye-opening experience. You... Li Wuxin rolled his eyes and turned back to Chua Chengyong. Chua Jiangmen, we of the upper cultivation realm practice strict adherence to the laws, and we intend to get to the bottom of this. If you really refuse to cooperate and will not hand over Yuheng, Moran and the rest, then I shall have no choice but to entreat the foremost sect of the cultivation world, Wufeng sect, to take charge of the investigation themselves. Chu Chengyong had always had a fierce temper. He scoffed at the threat. I'm well aware of your Bitan manner as chummy with the Wufeng sect, but even if Nanggong Liu himself stood before me today, I'd tell him the same thing. I will not hand them over. This has nothing to do with Yuheng. Well then, said Zhu Mang, hot on his heels. Li Chuangchu, kindly see yourself out. See that? Did everyone see that? Do you see how difficult and unreasonable they are? They're aiding and abetting criminals. A man's shaky voice burst from the crowd. It was the same back then, when that Mo character stole my friend's things. We came here courteously, seeking justice, and they brushed us off and kicked us out just like this. Li Chuangchu, you saw it too, right? If Sisheng Peak is allowed to continue acting so outrageously, considering themselves above the law, then the lower cultivation realm will be done for. He had barely finished when a low chuckle came from the hall's entrance. Everyone turned toward the door. There, in the shadows where the light spilling from the hall did not reach, stood a blue-robed young man in light armor. He leaned casually against the intricately carved vermilion doorframe and watched the scene within the hall with a languid expression. This youth was extremely handsome, his supple and firm skin practically glowing under the candlelight. Pray tell, Zhang Gongzi, when exactly did I ever steal anything from your friend? His smile was soft and charming. That wrong son, or was it wrong Jew? I can't remember. Anyway, that pretty boy, is he your friend or your paramour? Rather deceptive of you to only tell part of the story, What if you hurt his feelings? The man complaining so woefully was none other than that merchant Zhang from Yichu, the very same who had declared that Sisheng Peak hadn't seen the last of him all those months ago. Zhang Gongzi whipped his head around, startled to see Moran. But then something flickered in his eyes, and he howled in misery. Oh, why you bastard! My friendship with Jua is like that of a mortar and pestle, perfectly innocent. He's already died so tragically at the hands of your fiendish ilk, yet you still dare to slander his name. What? A chill ran down Moran's spine, and his eyes widened slightly. Rongju is dead? His parents are from Butterfly Town. Zhang Gongzi went on, angry and tearful. He met with misfortune while visiting home some days ago. That's how I learned of you and your shizun's evil deeds. That's why I went to Li Chuangchu for justice. Moran's opinion of Rongju was far from positive, so after the initial shock had passed, he dismissed Zhang Gongzi with a curt wave of his hand. Friendship of mortar and pestle? So what? You're the pestle and he's the mortar. Pound, pound, pound. Not sure how that's innocent, but okay. Moran! Zhang Gongzi hadn't expected this and was quite affronted. You illiterate reprobate! You! Ahem! It was a bit much for Madame Wang too. Only Chua Chengyong blinked and said nothing. Mortar this and pestle that. Whatever that meant, it couldn't be anything good. He felt like his nephew's words made quite a lot of sense, actually. Nothing wrong with them. From the darkness of the night outside the hall came a sigh like the shattering of jade or the first melt of a frozen-over lake, deep and indescribably lovely. A slender, well-proportioned hand reached out and delivered an unceremonious slap right across Moran's face. Such obscenity. Friendship of mortar and pestle means a friendship that disregards status and means, like that between Gong Shamu and Wu Yu. Chu Wanning appeared in the doorway, expression dark and tone cross. What are you doing hanging around by the door, being an embarrassment? Get the hell inside. Shizun! Shizun! Shu Meng and Shi Mei, overjoyed, rushed forward to greet him, but Chu Chengyong's eyes widened in exasperation. You Heng, what are you doing back here? How long were you planning to hold out by yourself if I didn't come? Chu Wanning strode serenely into Loyalty Hall, his handsome face like that of an immortal under the candlelight, unsurpassed in grace and elegance. He came to a stop before the golden seat within the hall and exchanged a nod with Chu Chengyong, then turned toward the petitioners with a flourish of his wide sleeves. Chu Wanning of Sisheng Peak, humble bearer of the title Yu Heng Elder. It seems you have questions for me. I would not refuse your answers. Li Wuxin stared in shock, but Chu Wanning, his phoenix eyes like smoke, spared him the barest glance before continuing in an even tone. Kindly do enlighten me.